Alright, hey guys, how are we doing? Back another video from the Salad Bar. I really enjoyed his Gojo versus Jojo Gauntlet. Thought that was pretty freaking cool. So we're going to check out Gojo versus the Dragon Ball Gauntlet. How far can he go? I... Majority of Dragon Ball characters can blow up planets. I don't see how far Gojo's getting in this. Maybe if he starts really low down. But I don't see him getting very far. So let's see how this goes.
Let's place Satoru Gojo into the world of Dragon Ball to run a gauntlet. How far would he make it into the series? You might have seen my last video explain why his hacks aren't enough to beat current Goku, but what about the previous arcs in Dragon Ball? His hacks are actually able to take him surprisingly far, but what actually is a stopping point? Let's start with a brief rundown about Gojo and his abilities.
Okay.
Most of these were covered in the previous video, and I'm sure you've already heard them ad nauseum, so we won't go too in-depth here again. This is necessary to understand going forward though, so it is worth going into. Once we cover this, we can actually go into how he would fare against certain arcs in Dragon Ball and different characters there. We'll begin covering his stats by talking about speed. JJK has characters that are capable of dodging lightning, with Hikari being the lower end of that. So, Jackpot Hikari, Kashimo, and anyone on their level or higher, they should be capable of this feat too, which makes them massively hypersonic. Add in the fact that Gojo also has teleportation as well. Overall, he's pretty good speed-wise. Strength is a little bit weirder to calculate, but we do have some sort of low end here that we could work with. At bare minimum, he should be considered city level. Jogo, who is no diff by Gojo by the way, is strong enough to summon a meteor with his maximum technique, which is capable of causing a devastating earthquake, and is also capable of destroying a good chunk of Shibuya. Not only is Gojo beyond Jogo's power, but he very casually fought a serious Jogo who used everything besides his maximum technique, including his domain too. So naturally, Gojo should have greater durability and attack power through his cursed energy. Of course, he did beat him by using his own domain just to show it off to Yuji, but he didn't actually need that there. Of course, it's kind of weird to place where his power truly is because we haven't seen him completely just trying to destroy something. We saw him go all out against Sukuna, but he's not trying to destroy surroundings around him. And outside of the version of Hollow Purple that acts kind of like an explosion, we don't really get to see the destructive power of too many of his attacks. So scaling them based on the feats of other characters is really the best we have to go off of. I feel like this isn't a crazy spot to put him in terms of attack power. There are ways to wank him higher, but we'll leave it at this for now.
Fair.
Let's talk about his actual abilities too, because this will give a little bit more context. Since some of you might already know his abilities, we won't go too in depth with them like I mentioned before, but still it's crucial to explain them at least somewhat in this video, because the crux of his power comes from these abilities, so having this context going forward will at least explain how he does in different arcs. His ability is Limitless, which allows Gojo to control the infinity around him. This manifests in a few ways. There's Neutral Infinity, which is just the field around Gojo that automatically slows anything getting closer to him, infinitely slowing things down by dividing the space between them. It looks like it can completely stop things, but technically it just slows them down so infinitely that it almost appears that they're stopped. This isn't impenetrable, and there are ways around it, mostly through other hacks, or if you're able to outspeed the infinity slowing you down. You could also get through infinity with an attack that Gojo can't perceive, or rather something that infinity isn't capable of filtering out. But just like the other assumptions, for this video we'll also assume that there's no attack like that could work like that here. Because again, just like the whole key restriction that I implemented, this would mean there's ways to kill Gojo really early on. We'll go more into this once we start talking about the different characters in Dragon Ball and how they react to it. Another technique of his is Blue, a strength and infinity which attracts things to him. Then there's his curse technique Reversal Red, which is the inverse of Blue basically. He also stated that, in terms of the energy output, Red is at least twice as powerful as Blue, and on top of repelling people, it could actually act as a blast, as shown on multiple occasions. Then he also has access to Purple, which is Red and Blue combined, making an imaginary mass that can be deployed basically as an explosive blast, or a force that cuts through almost anything in its path, sort of acting as just a laser. That's not actually what it is, but that's really the best way to describe it. We see it work this way against Toji, and in terms of the explosive version, we see it used against Sukuna. It's worth noting that Sukuna arguably was able to take this attack head on and actually tank it, but on other occasions the attack has indiscriminately cut through other mass and people around it, including people like Toji and Hanami who are relatively strong too. Arguably the greatest feat of it is destroying Toji's inventory curse, which is actually a 4-dimensional space, which could kind of be considered an outlier too. Since, given how it worked against Sukuna, it doesn't seem to be that powerful all the time. Its attack power and mechanics seem to vary, so theorizing the upper limit of what it could destroy or cut through is pretty tough. Since the previous video was kind of trying to wank Gojo to see how well he'd do against Goku, I did cover the upper limit of it and how far you could wank it, but keep in mind, that is wank, but I'll link it here if you want to check it out.
How many times can you use the word wank?
That video does go more in depth about how far you could actually push it. Then there's Gojo's domain expansion Unlimited Void, which can be used on anyone with curse energy, and it
Love it. Let's briefly go over.
grants his attacks a guaranteed hit. Alongside the added bonus of overloading the target's mind with endless info, only avoided if Gojo's actually touching the target. This is going to be very valuable going into this video because simply being exposed to this for 0.2 seconds, at least if you're a normal person, it puts you into a coma like
For 6 months, yeah.
State, and it will incapacitate a normal person up to the point where they're not able to rejoin society for 6 months.
Yeah.
Of course, prolonged exposure will kill you too. Not to mention, there's the fact that there's a guaranteed hit in there, so if he decides to use a purple on you, you're taking that head on. Domains are escapable, but the fact that it just overloads you with info pretty much instantly, it means you'd have to react really quickly and realize you're in a domain in the first place, and then also realize that you can escape it by breaking through it. Domains are meant to keep people inside, so they're pretty well fortified, but it shouldn't be too hard for some Dragon Ball characters to break through it.
Yes, I reckon they could blast it out with a really powerful Kamehameha.
The issue is realizing that they can break through it and reacting in time to actually do so. Another thing Gojo has to his advantage is Six Eyes, which allows him to analyze his target beyond simple things that sight can reveal. It's mostly useful against other sorcerers, and it gives him precise control over cursed energy to make it virtually impossible for his cursed energy to run out, so there's also the bonus of that. And one more ability worth mentioning, Gojo has Reverse Curse Technique, which allows him to heal himself. Of course, for this video, we're going to assume that others in Dragon Ball have cursed energy as well, since naturally that probably would happen. That happens with regular people in JJK, and the way cursed energy works is that it's born from negative emotions in the first place, which does happen with other powers in Dragon Ball. If we brought the power of cursed energy into Dragon Ball's verse, it probably would be present in a lot of the characters too. Plus, without doing this, it's kind of boring because it limits Gojo's strongest ability. And on top of this, for this video, we'll assume that Six Eyes works as well on Ki users as it does for cursed energy users, allowing Gojo to analyze the Ki-based fighters in Dragon Ball.
Makes it a little bit more interesting, doesn't it?
And one more assumption for this video, we'll assume that Gojo's Infinity will actually be able to filter out Ki just like cursed energy. Otherwise, Infinity would be pointless here, and Gojo would die in the first saga by a max power Kamehameha from Roshi. Again, just like giving other people cursed energy so his domain can work, it would be pretty pointless to have it so his Infinity could be negated by just having a Ki attack.
Yeah.
Cross-verse battles don't really work as interestingly if you don't equalize things like this, so for the sake of this video, we will be doing those things. Now let's talk about the actual arcs and see how Gojo would do in them, as well as how far he'd make it and who he'd be able to defeat. First, we have the Pilaf Saga. No one in this saga would be an issue for Gojo besides full power Roshi, who actually was able to destroy Fry Pan Mountain with a Kamehameha, placing the upper limit of his power at mountain level, but Roshi would not have the speed to penetrate Gojo's Limitless, nor would his Kamehameha have the speed to do so. Great Ape Goku is easily outmaneuvered and beaten, with Gojo possibly even analyzing his tail.
Yeah, he's too big, and he doesn't have any kind of consciousness either to, like, control himself, so
That was a weak point through Six Eyes. Those two would be the toughest characters in the saga for him to fight. Max Power Roshi would definitely give him the most trouble, but nothing a domain expansion can fix. At worst, he has a stalemate against Max Power Roshi, but most likely he sweeps everyone here. Same goes for the 21st World Tournament. For this arc, we'll actually put Gojo in the tournament and assume that he can't kill either and has to abide by the tournament rule.
Goddamn, alright, let's just keep adding more rules on top,
He still is untouchable and can easily beat most people. Full Power Roshi, of course, is still the biggest issue, and same with Great Ape Goku. But they still wouldn't have the speed or hacks to penetrate Limitless.
Not fast enough
Roshi, of course, gets a huge buff here in terms of power and speed, thanks to the feat of him destroying the moon with a Kamehameha, but that's still not nearly enough to go through Limitless. Because with Limitless automatically filtering out the Kamehameha, it still would be infinitely slowed down and it wouldn't be able to touch Gojo. Next, we have the Red Ribbon Army Saga. Gojo has the power, speed, and abilities to take down the entire Red Ribbon Army. Even the strongest fighters in this arc like Blue and Tao. As well as Goku too. After all, special grades like him are described as being capable of taking over an entire country on their own, and an army of this size would be no issue for him, especially with his feats and such. By this point in the series, Gojo still outclasses a lot of people in terms of power and speed. Infinity is always active too, but he won't need to rely on it as much as later on. Nor will he need to rely on his actual domain expansion, except in very specific cases, but for the most part he can actually do a lot of this with just his regular raw power. Same goes for the Fortune Teller Baba Saga. It's worth noting that Gojo probably still could be killed by a Devil Might Beam, assuming it could actually attack him. It could exploit any impurity within anyone, so if Gojo were hit by
negative thoughts and destructive beams that can annihilate anything in the path, only works if there are negative thoughts in the target's mind to begin with. Yeah, because cursed energy is negative
it would kill him.
So, yeah.
But this attack definitely doesn't have the speed to penetrate through Limitless. Toriyama has actually said before that if this technique were used on later villains from Dragon Ball, it probably wouldn't even hit them. This attack surely wouldn't be fast enough to penetrate through Limitless either. Still worth noting though, because I'm sure someone will bring up this technique specifically, but as for the rest of the saga, it's pretty much the same case as the last few. The 22nd World Tournament is when Gojo will probably start having some sort of difficulty, but still not really too much difficulty. Just from the active characters in this arc alone, it's basically what I said for the 21st World Tournament, but it's not just two characters that are really strong here, there are a few who have grown a lot stronger.
The speed feats as well. Isn't this when Tien does the flash solar flare and Goku within that space of time manages to grab glasses from someone in the crowd to wear them for it to not affect him instantaneously?
Tenshinhan and Goku are of course the peak, but their attack power and durability still don't match Gojo's. And another common theme here, they still can't get through Limitless here. Now we move into the King Piccolo saga. Obviously, King Piccolo is the biggest issue here in terms of attack power, but still there's no way to break through Limitless, and a domain would actually kill him. But this is the point where Gojo starts to have trouble actually killing people with just raw attack power, given the fact that King Piccolo could be scaled to above moon level. Now, King Piccolo's sons would be no issue because their feats aren't really too great, and Gojo could still beat them with his regular attacks.
Okay.
But specifically for Goku and Piccolo, this is when he's going to have to start relying on his domain if he wants to actually kill them. Because given the fact that Goku was able to defeat King Piccolo, that would place him around moon level too. As for a Mufuba, it might actually be hard to get this to work on Gojo because first of all, it requires a setup, and second of all, it's risky here in this arc still. Also, there's the fact that only Roshi and Tenshinhan could pull it off here. But it's been shown that this attack can be reflected, or it could just be avoided completely if someone anticipates it. Now, the question is if this technique could wrap around Limitless, or if it actually needs to touch Gojo directly. If it needs to touch Gojo directly, it's still not going to break through Infinity, but if it can work by surrounding Gojo entirely, including his Infinity, it could actually seal him theoretically. But that's only if it works that way and they're able to actually land this on him.
I mean, yeah, because he gets sealed within the world of JJK, doesn't he? So, like, it's not beyond the realm of possibility.
Which would be tough as is. It has a slim chance of hitting him, and it would need to work by not hitting Gojo directly. But if that actually is the case, this would be the first time that there's actually a way to defeat Gojo and bypass Limitless. Well, not really bypassing it, more so just surrounding Gojo entirely with something. Now we get to the 23rd World Tournament. Gojo's strength really starts to falter here. He could win this tournament through the usage of his domain, and he's still untouchable, but his attack power won't help out here at all, at least as he gets closer to the higher levels. His best bet is activating a quick domain expansion, and then hitting red to knock someone out of the ring. A guaranteed hit that would push them back. He'd have to rely
Star Dragon Ball Z is going to be a real slog for him.
And actually incapacitating someone first. And his regular attacks wouldn't actually be able to do anything against anyone here. Purple's probably the only thing that could do any sort of damage here. But even then, higher tier characters like Goku and Piccolo Jr. would likely be able to resist it somewhat. Although he still has multiple ways to win the tournament, which makes him a World Tournament champ 3 times in a row. Now that we transition into Dragon Ball Z, things start to get a lot more nuanced, I guess. Powers start to go really crazy here in Dragon Ball, and we start to see more ways to defeat Gojo, or at least show a stalemate. For the most part, Gojo is untouchable still in the Saiyan saga, but from here on out, Gojo basically can't kill anyone else outside of using his domain. They can't hurt Gojo, and vice versa. For the most part, this would lead to stalemates, and at best, Gojo simply survives his encounters. It is also worth noting here that characters are actually much faster here on out, to the point where they're quick enough to actually break out of the domain in time. And it's not a select few, because once we get into the actual Saiyan invasion later on, pretty much any of the Z fighters should be capable of doing this. Not to mention, planetary destruction from any of the Saiyans could actually kill Gojo, because he can't survive out in space, but it is a risky maneuver that would kill them if they didn't escape in time. Then again though, Vegeta did try to blow up Earth against Goku, so maybe he could use this as a final attempt to kill Gojo, assuming he gets really desperate for some reason and wants to pull out all the stops. But again, no one in this arc is fast enough to penetrate through Limitless, nor would have some sort of weird hacks to actually break through it either. Gojo's domain starts to lose effectiveness, which would mean Gojo basically has no way to attack anyone anymore. At least for the higher end characters. And as we go further on into Dragon Ball Z, this is going to be more of the case here. He'll still have his great defenses, but nothing else really. All someone needs to counter this domain is to break out within a fraction of a second. Which sounds daunting, but for Dragon Ball characters at this level, they're definitely fast enough to do this.
Yep.
I would still assume the domain works on them just like any other regular human, even though they're not technically regular humans, or humans at all. At least for the Saiyans.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, it probably would work on their brains the same way, so if Gojo activates his domain, and 0.2 seconds is enough to severely incapacitate them, they need to break through the domain in a fraction of that time. Which definitely isn't impossible here, especially with how fast characters get in later arcs. Let's go to Namek now. There's actually more ways to kill Gojo in this arc, or at least defeat him, and it might not even require
There's more ways to kill him now, yay!
First is Ginyu, because his body swap thing might actually be able to break through this. The question is if Infinity can block something like this. The attack probably doesn't have the speed to actually get through Infinity, but the question is whether or not it would actually be filtered out by Infinity in the first place. Assuming it does actually work, Ginyu could swap bodies with him and kill Gojo that way. Although it would be kind of stupid for him to do this because of how much weaker Gojo is, and the fact that he probably wouldn't be able to use Gojo's abilities either. All hypothetical though, because this assumes that his body swap works in the first place. There's also Goldo's ability to paralyze people and stop time. Paralysis might not do anything to activate Limitless, but the time stop is interesting, because would Infinity still work during the time stop?
Because we mentioned that in the JoJo one, didn't we? It's like where when the world's in use, is Infinity in use? Because if Infinity can't comprehend that time has stopped and it's always working when Gojo's fully aware of stuff, he's not aware when time stopped, so is Infinity working?
Goldo's the only thing able to move throughout all of this, so unless Infinity somehow is still working during this time stop, he might actually be the first person in this gauntlet able of breaking through Infinity and touching Gojo. And he'd have more than enough power to actually kill him too. There's also Frieza having the ability to just blow up the planet if he wants, and he'd actually survive that. Not Gojo though, and that would really be his only way of defeating Gojo. Again, it would just be a stalemate at best. because at this point characters are so fast that they'd definitely be able to escape his domain, considering a lot of these characters have faster than light combat speed, as well as incredibly fast reactions too. Next we move on to the Android Saga and
Oh my god.
the Cell games. As for 16, 17, and 18, ironically, fighting Gojo would just be a limitless battle because he wouldn't run out of curse energy,
And they'd never run out. Yeah.
and the androids won't get
Wow, yeah.
tired either. And we're at the point where the domains are still not going to work on people, but it is worth noting, Android 16 is probably immune to the domain because he wouldn't have cursed energy. He's
Yeah, he's got nothing.
a robot. As for 17 and 18, they're cyborgs, so they're still part human. Even though they might not have ki, they still would probably have cursed energy. Although that's kind of up in the air, so maybe they would be immune to the domain.
I reckon they would.
Cell at the very least would still be susceptible to it, but he'd be able to escape relatively easily still. It's just worth noting that the other androids, specifically 16, they might not be affected by it like others. And we might actually have a few ways to break through Limitless here, although it kind of requires Gojo to be in the series beforehand. In a hypothetical where Gojo was actually in the series since the beginning and Jiro was able to study him, maybe he was able to cook up a way to actually work around Limitless.
Ooh.
And this data would be in the androids. On top of that, if this were the
Hey, that's really interesting. I like that.
case, maybe Gojo's DNA could be given to Cell. Yes, Jiro's drones wouldn't be able to get
Oh my god.
through Limitless, but
Yeah, so Cell would have Gojo's DNA.
Gojo would leave DNA samples behind, like hair for example, which means there's a possibility that Cell could have Gojo's DNA, and maybe have his own Limitless, as well as the means to break through Gojo's Limitless.
Yo.
Cell also has a few other ways of killing Gojo. First of all, blowing up the planet. Second of all, if he's able to expand his tail enough, he doesn't even need to break through Limitless. He could just absorb Gojo as is. He'd either suffocate inside of Cell's tail, which would deactivate Limitless, or Cell could just swallow him whole. But in the very weirdly specific scenario where Gojo's actually in the story from the beginning, there's a chance Jiro might have prepared the androids to actually fight him.
Yeah.
But if we're treating this like a regular gauntlet, that wouldn't be the case at all.
Yeah,
and
it's
Cell
cool.
wouldn't have
That's
Gojo's
a fun
DNA
little one to
either.
throw in, though. I
That's
like
just
that.
a fun hypothetical worth mentioning.
Yeah.
But we're still at a point where it's tough for people to get through Infinity, because attack speeds and power might still not be at the point where they can actually get through it. You would either need to completely cut reality, or have an attack with at least infinite speed that won't be infinitely slowed down by Infinity. Wow, I just said Infinity like 3 times in that sentence. Wonder how many times I've said it throughout this entire video.
Quite a bit.
Also, let's briefly cover instant transmission because this is when that starts to come into play. I briefly covered this in the last video too, but let's cover it here again. This likely wouldn't be able to do anything because, unless they teleport directly into Gojo, Goku or Cell using instant transmission would just teleport into Infinity, so they'd be slowed down regardless. As far as we know, instant transmission can't just teleport right into somebody, and that's really the only way it could actually
Yeah,
bypass
that's a
Infinity.
weird one.
You would just teleport into the Infinity and then instantly be slowed down by it. It wouldn't really help out here. Whatever, onto the Buu Saga now. This is a tournament Gojo would lose. Others might not be able to hit him. But I'm sure one of the many characters here could work up a way to
Hey, everyone's so goddamn powerful within the Buu Saga now.
actually just toss him out of the ring. Not to mention a lot of them have telekinesis, so they could toss him out of the ring that way. Plus in the Buu Saga we start to have some reality warping feats, and ki that could reach much higher speeds as well. Plus we see more magic get involved, specifically with Babidi and Buu. Babidi's magic might actually be able to take over Gojo's mind. Since magic is something that he's never faced, Babidi's magic is something he can't overpower, and it's something that Infinity can't filter out. And at bare minimum, anyone with the power of Super Saiyan 3 Gotenks or Super Buu is able to rip through dimensions with sound alone. A Vice Shout or a similarly powerful attack, that should be able to rip through Infinity and just kill Gojo as is
Yeah,
too.
wow. Okay,
Also-
what a cool example to show. Yeah, because if they can rip through dimensions, then surely they can rip through
To
infinity.
completely destroy his ears. But that's one attack capable of killing him, and there's other reality warping feats later on too. In the anime, for example, Buhan does this by almost breaking reality. Buu's magic might also be able to penetrate Infinity, but that depends on the speed of travel. Although if the magic surrounds him, maybe it still could turn him into candy and then he could be defeated that way. Plus, Buu could also absorb Gojo by just simply surrounding him with himself. Yeah, Buu's flesh wouldn't be able to get through Infinity, but it could suffocate him. With a bubble around him, if he's not teleporting away, he could probably be restricted like this. There's another really interesting thing to note here, and we don't know how much earlier this will apply to, but it has to do with his domain expansion. Now, of course, we know that a lot of people could break out of his domain by now. But characters at this point might actually be able to counter Gojo's domain, at least in the sense that it overloads their brains. Vegeta was able to resist Babidi's mind manipulation. So even disregarding the speed to leave the domain, if the characters stayed in Gojo's domain, they might actually be able to resist the overload of info.
Wow.
Despite the guaranteed hit, now we have mind manipulation resistance, and resisting these thoughts being put in their head. So it's pretty safe to say that this is the arc where Gojo taps out. Of course, his attacks got useless a while back, but here, a lot of characters are capable of defeating him, and pretty easily too. The speed and destructive capacity of the attacks in this part of the series and onwards, it's far too much for Infinity and for Gojo to handle. So we stop here because going to Super and GT would be pointless, since
would be
characters get
ridiculous,
progressively
yeah.
stronger, to the point where the characters in the Buu Saga look like fodder. So, now to summarize. Gojo could actually contend pretty well with early Dragon Ball, and he could defeat a lot of them too. He probably would win a lot of the tournaments as well. although his attacks are mostly useless by the Saiyan Saga, and then his domain slowly starts to lose effectiveness after that from the Saiyan Saga onwards. And after Namek, we start seeing even more ways to get through Infinity. Plus, we have the hypothetical cell that could have Gojo's data, and the ability to break through it that way. And by the Buu Saga, raw power and key attacks alone are enough to get through Infinity. And frankly, I think it's a pretty big highball to say Gojo can make it that far. Again, most of it hinges on the fact that he has to rely on Infinity. He's not able to hurt anybody, and he might even stop earlier on than that, but this is where we could definitively draw a line and say his hacks will not work at all. In terms of raw attacks, though, he becomes useless way earlier on. He's really just sitting there hoping for a stalemate at best, and thus ends his Dragon Ball Gauntlet. What do you think? Does he stop later on, or does he stop even earlier than that? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and remember, this wasn't supposed to be a crazy in-depth power scaling video, just something I wanted to do for fun. So talk civilly with each other in the comments. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.
I mean, I pretty much agree. Yeah, fair enough. I mean, obviously, Star Z, everyone can blow up planets. So yeah, but yeah, it's just yeah, I thought that was quite cool. That was really, some interesting scenarios thrown in as well. Like if Gojo was part of the DBZ universe, would Jiro have taken his DNA and Cell be able to do stuff that Gojo could do? That's a little fun one to throw in as well. But yeah, that was cool. And next, I'm gonna check out the Sukuna Dragon Ball Gauntlet. And there's a couple of other things I want to check out. But until then, thank you to my patrons. If you want to have your name at the end of every video and want to be able to watch Patreon-only reactions, such as the original Dragon Ball series, links in the description to the Patreon page. $1 a month is all that helps our channel. Greatly appreciated. Thanks for that. Thank you all for watching. What do you guys think of that? You guys think of this? Click like, subscribe if you haven't already. Leave comments below. Let me know what I should watch and discuss in future videos. And I'll see you guys all, next time.